We have two speakers. So firstly, I'm going to welcome Chen Lee, Head of Publishing from the Times Publishing Group in Singapore. Chen has been with that group for over 15 years and has worked in its publishing businesses in Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia and Thailand. She was instrumental in setting up Times Publishing Group's electronic publishing business. And prior to that, she worked at the Ministry of Education in Singapore and as a lecturer in Hong Kong. Chen.
Good morning. It's a privilege for me to be here. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm happy to share our Singapore story with you. Let me just get my act together. I'm very aware of the time. I'm going to skip most of the slides about the Singapore because most of you know Singapore by now. Just wanted to show you that we weren't doing well in the 60s, but in about 40 years we have come to where we are today. I'm very proud about the literacy rate. And of course, I think most of the countries that I have been working with, they know the ranking that we have achieved. But of course, I also always illustrate to people that it is not as though Singapore does not have its share of its own problems. We have unequal incomes. We have households who can't afford textbooks or books. We have our racial composition. We have different races. And we speak a total of probably like 12 dialects just amongst the Chinese ourselves, and the English and the Bahasa and in Tamil. We have short working school hours as well, 7:30 to 1 for the primary and then 7:30 to 1:30. And even for a very important subject like mathematics, we only have about 5 hours a week to teach that. This, of course, is 2015 now. The teachers, the qualifications have jumped by a lot. When I first started in the 80s, it was the reverse. We had more non-graduates and very few graduates, right? What I'm interested in talking to you about is really this development in the Singapore education system. I think for most of us, we started off we got our independence, and then we started off with actually trying to get people to come in and build factories because we had no resources. So manufacturing was the only thing we knew how to do. And because of that, you had a very small group of literate people trying to teach a large group of not very literate people, equipping them with skills, basic skills just for the factories and the manufacturing industries. And then, of course, that succeeded, that model, and we became more of a white collar. We also became more of a service industry. So there was still this need to actually educate our people to make sure that everyone knew the basic literacy, numeracy, because we needed to cope with the service industry. But the trained teachers, there was a big shortage. And I think this is where we found that having the textbooks publish a standard textbook helped everyone, right? You need to teach in the shortest time possible. You need to teach a huge group of people, and it has to be handled by maybe one teacher to 50 students. How do you do that without a standardized teaching tool, a standardized learning tool? Of course, now that we are with the 21st century, I think it's gotten worse for my colleagues, because now you have to be the teacher that can answer everything. You not only have to be knowledgeable in your own subject, and most of the teachers teach a variety of subjects, so you don't have just a mathematics graduate teaching mathematics. He will have to double up and teach art, physical education, science. Oh, so-and-so is off sick, so you have to take over the English language lessons. And that was why it's a bit of a pressure cookpot for the teachers in Singapore. And then they have to cope with all the changes in technology and education as well. And for that, I think the role of a responsible publisher partner is important. In the early days, before we had this new economy now, the Ministry of Education itself had different divisions, all right? The curriculum planning division took care of the syllabus development. The CDIS, we call it, they did all the textbook publishing. And then, of course, we have the exams division. And the publishers were always on the outside, never to be included in the inner circle. All divisions were independent, and they made sure that they did not influence each other, and yet the collaboration was fantastic, I would have to say. I was actually part of the curriculum development side, the syllabus development, and then I joined the publishing side, and this was an example of how it works. The curriculum development side would come up with the syllabus, for instance, for maths, right? Came up with all the pedagogical framework and how it should be rolled out in the schools. And then what happened was we will then do this as part of the textbooks, and the Curriculum Development Institute, the textbook publishing division, will work with the publisher. In this case, it was Marshall Cavendish, and then they would come up with the textbooks and roll it out to all the schools and the teachers. And even in the 90s and up to 2000, when there were changes, there was a lot of collaboration in the sense that the syllabus development people had to work with the textbook development people, who had to work with the publishers like ourselves, who would all agree on more or less what we wanted to see, and the textbooks will then be published. In 2001, I think the Ministry of Education felt comfortable enough to realize that the system of publishing in Singapore is now very robust, and they can trust the publishers to do good textbooks without them watching over us all the time. So they opened the market to commercial publishers, and it has actually been fun for us because now you have a lot more different ideas, different publishers coming into play. So there are two systems there. You can either tender for a textbook project, or it can be an open market where somebody develops the textbooks according to the syllabus that's issued by the Ministry of Education, and we will then get it approved by the Ministry of Education, and we will sell the books. I wanted to talk more about the needs of the teachers and the students. Like I said, over the years, we've realized that there is still very much a shortage of well-trained teachers. The students all come with different abilities. Right? How do you teach a class? And we generally will have classes whereby you have very good, superb students, and they will be sitting right next to someone who have not grasped the basic concepts. How do you then educate them all at the same time within that 5 hours? And that was why we felt that a good textbook was important. And the other thing was that we also needed some of the teacher-centric part, because we realized that many of the teachers, they were not keeping up in touch with what was happening in the pedagogical field. So as we were doing the textbooks, we were then conducting sessions on training, pre-service, in-service, and teaching them how to manage with the books as well as the digital contents. So for publishing a textbook, I always called it a science and an art. You have a set of criteria whereby you will be judged, but you also have to be very aware of what the students need, what the teachers need, and what Ministry of Education wants. And a lot of times they all don't agree on their needs. And to be able to cater to that and make them feel that your book is worth looking at. I think we give a lot of thought to our instructional design. We're very aware that it has to be a good book that will be attractive to the students. We work on, for instance, piloting our books, working with the teachers and working with the students on sample chapters. We give the teachers what I would call the armory, a whole host of things, right? It's got to be books, guidebooks for the teachers who have not actually kept up with the changes, digital resources, because that's important now, and of course the platform in which they can work. And for this, we do a lot of collaborative work. Let me give you an example of the collaboration. For instance, for digital contents, which is important now, The ministry actually came up with this idea about the digital contents for students in 1998. And they came to us because we're one of the largest publishers for Singapore. So we started working together with them to deliver animated lessons to schools. The software, everything was developed. And that worked out well. And it was important that it worked out well because it gave them the confidence then that actually publishers can do digital contents. And what happened was then, after that, a whole host of other technology partners came in, publishers, e-book people, and we're now working on the learning management system with the contents for the schools. But in 2016, there's been an announcement by the Ministry of Education, which is very, very interesting. What they want to do is to actually have a kind of portal, and they will curate contents from all over for the students and the teachers to use. Oh, yes, I cut myself off, sir. Thank you so much. I have a timer. I think this is something about Singaporeans. We're kind of obsessed about timing and all. But this, I wanted to share with you the new vision that is important because what it puts together is, what I realize as well is that the technology publishers, they may have all the whistles and bells, and they may be able to do a lot of the exciting apps, but they don't know how to do textbooks. So that's why it ended up actually a collaborative way. We work with each other, and we bring to the table what we know about textbooks, all the various robust standards that we need for a good education material, and they will then bring to us their technology. So far it has worked out well, and yeah, we are now with books as well as with the digital. And I think that's important to give the teachers a comfort that they're actually working in a good environment. Thank you.
Debbie Morgan, Director for Primary, National Centre for Excellence in the Teaching of Mathematics. Debbie's career in education spans over 20 years, beginning as a reception class teacher, and has since then taught every age range in the primary phase and as a head teacher. Now, early in her career, she developed a passion for mathematics, and in 2004, she was appointed a senior lecturer in mathematics education at the University of Northampton, involved in primary initial teacher education and practitioner professional development. We'd like to congratulate Debbie on her recent doctorate from the Open University. And it's apposite because the focus of her doctoral studies was on the Mathematics Specialist Teacher Programme and its impact, with a particular emphasis on the nature and development of deep subject knowledge. I give you Dr. Morgan.
Okay. So the background to my involvement in textbooks has been as my role as Primary Director for NCETM. I've been involved in carrying out an informal review on behalf of the Department of Education into mathematics textbooks in this country, and did a comparative analysis with 2 Singaporean textbooks. We've since developed a textbook project across the maths hubs. There are 34 maths hubs which are managed by NCETM within this country, and that's still ongoing. We've since gathered research from our own findings and from research literature and used that to provide and publish a textbook guidance to support publishers in the design of textbooks and also to support teachers in the selection of textbooks. A key aspect that a textbook can do, and where the teachers I'm working with are realising more and more its importance, is that of mathematical coherence and that detailed conceptual journey through the mathematics that is required if children are going to acquire the basic concepts and the basic skills in order to build on in later learning. And teachers are recognising that in the past that has been missing for their teaching, and they're now realising not only it's been missing but also its key importance in terms of children's learning. Here's an example. I've looked at international textbooks, in particular Singapore, Japan, and Shanghai, China. Here's an example from China. In this example, you will see that not only does the textbook look at the procedure of division, but it goes further and it goes deeper than that. On this page of the textbook, the relationship between the dividend and the divisor, and indeed the relationship, if we keep that ratio relationship constant by multiplying by the same number, the dividend and the divisor, we see that actually the quotient, the answer to the calculation, remains the same. Identifying that generalized relationship and the underlying structure of the mathematics leads to greater depth and sustainability in learning, and also supports the procedural fluency in that I no longer now have to work with this complex decimal calculation, but I can change it into whole numbers, and the answer I get, I can be confident that that is the answer to my original calculation. Reflected in this is the idea of teaching with variation. It's a very strong idea in the research literature, and many researchers attribute successful teaching in Shanghai to this idea of teaching with variation, where links and connections are made between mathematics and indeed individual calculation, looking at what's staying the same, the underlying structure of the mathematics, and what changes and what the impact of that change, as you can see in this calculation. So the textbooks are far more than just instructions of what to do. They are rigorous in their conceptual base and lead and support that deep, sustainable learning. Here's another example from a Shanghai textbook, a grade 1 textbook this time, where the image is to support children going deeper into the fiveness of 5, recognizing that 5 is more than just 5, but it's also 4 and 1, it's also 3 and 2, 2 and 3, etc. And the images support children in that clear progressive structure and working systematically in that way from a very early stage, looking for patterns and connections and relationships within the mathematics. Practice makes perfect, so the saying goes. Well, I would say it depends. It depends on the nature of that practice, the nature of that practice that is provided within textbooks and textbooks materials. Here's an example here, again reflecting variation, where these calculations are particularly chosen and put together in 2 times 3, 2 times 30, 2 times 300. Many of our children would go 2 times 3, 2 times 3 is 6, and then they would look at the next one, 2 times 30, I don't know what that is, let me try and work it out, and not recognise that there's a connection which makes the mathematics easier between these subsequent calculations. So the textbook and the carefully chosen examples expose that for the teacher, and indeed for the teacher to draw attention to when working with pupils, again leading to that deep and sustainable learning, collecting together the mathematics in nuggets, which we know from cognitive science research in terms of learning is very efficient for sustained and very effective for sustained learning. Another key aspect of textbooks is the support that they give for teacher professional development. Certainly the textbook project that we've worked on, teachers have recognised that the textbook is supporting them with that. Research such as Leaping Mars, very famous research in a comparative research between the US and China, recognised that actually the textbook can be a key vehicle for supporting not only pupil learning, but teacher professional development, both pedagogic development and also subject knowledge development, as they look at the examples and discuss together the nature of those examples, why they've been chosen, and their potential to support learning. And so an interim evaluation of our textbook project suggests several things. I've just pulled out a few things here. Certainly they are supporting teachers in the development of that subject knowledge and that pedagogy, but in particular supporting them in recognising that detailed conceptual journey that is required through the mathematics. And indeed, the textbooks lend themselves to that linear pathway through the mathematics, ensuring that there are no gaps in learning and that children are thinking deeply enough and developing deeply enough in order to make connections and build in subsequent learning. It is freeing up some time of primary teachers who are very, very busy people, but it's freeing up time in order for them to instead of searching the internet for bits and pieces to support their lessons, it's freeing up time for them to think deeply about the lesson they are about to deliver. What particular difficulties might there be, and how can they support children? What images and representations can they use to support the learning? How do they connect the learning to previous learning? And indeed then supporting that really coherent journey through the mathematics, a key resource for them. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
But if you want to make a comment or response either to Fei Chen or Debbie, please raise your hand if you're in the room. Wait for the microphone to reach you. Stand up, state your name and your organisation, of course. And we can have a small sort of mini debate now. I mean, it's fascinating. We've already had somebody coming in on Twitter. A UK teacher, Singapore maths textbooks have certainly had a positive effect in my classroom. So that's a start. That's from Laura Spendlove. And an interesting question from somebody else: why can't all textbooks be available free online? If there's a publisher in the room, I'm sure they'd like to address that a little later on, or you could address it now if you like. Does anybody want to pick up on any of the remarks we've had so far? Right at the back of the room on the right-hand side.
Yes, of course. Okay. Alka Segal-Cuthbert. I'm a PhD researcher in education. It's a question for Debbie, really, and the fascinating overview you gave of the examples from those textbooks, and you talked about needing to identify the general principles. And I was just wondering whether you had found any problems or whether that conflicted with other imperatives in education to make knowledge relevant or everyday, to really locate the meanings in more everyday cultural contexts, whether that's possible. Has that been done? Is it possible to do that and still retain the conceptual clarity?
I think that might be for both of them. Did you want to take a seat up here so we can respond to that? Fei Chen, do you want to come up? So Debbie, do you want to?
Yes, in response to that question. I think in particular what has been really important alongside the textbooks has been professional development to support teachers in how to use the textbook, because it's a very different approach from what teachers previously remember when they did use textbooks many years ago. It's a very different pedagogic approach. The textbook is a support for the teacher. It doesn't dominate that journey. It's that support, and there is that flexibility in that. And indeed, the textbooks encourage that flexibility for teachers to come up with some context of their own to support the core material that's already there, and indeed to take ideas from the children that they are working from. So it's not a turn to page 32 and let's all work through the textbook. Often the textbook isn't even referred to or got out at the beginning of the lesson. It may be got out later when we want to do some practice, or it's got out at a certain point when there's a really key image in there that we want to put up on the whiteboard in order for us to focus on. So that pedagogic approach that is used alongside the textbook has been really, really important for that.
So I see Fei Chen's been nodding her head there. But you would agree with all of that? Do you want to add anything to that?
I think I was going to address the issue about why publishers should not be paid for their textbooks.
By all means, do that as well.
I think it depends. The countries that I've worked with, some countries have, of course, the government subsidizes the payment of the textbooks, and in some countries the students are given the textbooks free. But I guess behind every textbook, there's a huge team working on it to bring it across to the people. And in my case, I would say that it would be hard not to charge for textbooks because in order to have the kind of standards that we have for our textbooks, we actually recruit ex-teachers, teachers who've worked in the field. We've got consultants, and we've got a whole host of people contributing to the contents for the books. And so it's a matter of whether the parents pay for it, or the public pays for it, or the government pays for it. In Singapore, I would say that in a way the textbook is subsidized because the government actually host a lot of things. Like in the case of these digital contents that I'm talking about, they host the portal, and what we do is we will put the resources online for the teachers. And I'm actually very excited about this new technology because the textbook, as soon as it is printed, it is already old. The facts are there, you can't change anything. And we found that with, like what I said, the variety of teaching styles, the kinds of learning abilities of the students, some teachers then need to pull different resources to support their lesson. So in the case of the very, very, what I would say, adventurous teacher, he can do an experiment with the students. And then in the case of those who need a more structured form of teaching, he will then be able to download worksheets, practices for the children. So it's actually coming all together, and it's been quite exciting. Yeah.
So I think I've just got to mention the University of Essex. They provide core textbooks free of charge to their online students. They're quite keen on that, and I feel I should let you know that. But what you've actually said there, we've got a Cambridge maths teacher, Mark Dawes, coming through. Maybe it isn't how good a book is, but it's how you use it. And it's worrying if a pupil uses it unmediated. Would you both agree with that?
Yes, and it's what I said about the professional development that has to go alongside, and indeed the teacher manual that provides support for that as well are equally important.
But you could just as easily say that a very good teacher can use a bad textbook to equal effect.
Well, the examples I gave in terms, I mean, what is really key in high quality textbooks used in Southeastern Asian countries in particular is the very careful and the amount of effort put into the choice of the very careful examples. So a bad textbook, you wouldn't get those in there. So what the teachers are benefiting from, what they say is freeing up their time, is I don't have the time to think of all those really carefully chosen examples. So having them in a high quality textbook is really valuable.
Thank you very much.